The glass of champagne felt cold against my palm, though the room was warm with chatter and music. I had promised myself that tonight would be about moving forward, about reminding myself I could stand in the same room as my past without collapsing. My name is Lauren. I'm 30 years old, and I never thought divorce would bring me here to a glittering ballroom in Santa Monica, where the smell of salt from the ocean mixed with perfume and money. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, simple compared to the sequins and diamonds surrounding me. It wasn't that I couldn't wear those things. I had chosen not to. I wanted dignity, not decoration. Still, when I caught sight of my reflection in the mirrored column by the bar, I wondered if I looked more like a shadow than a guest. And then he arrived. My ex-husband, his stride as arrogant as ever, stepped into the light of the chandeliers with a woman at his arm. She wasn't just anyone. She was his assistant, the one he had always called efficient, harmless, practically invisible. Tonight, she was anything but. Her gown was scarlet, plunging the kind of choice made to provoke whispers. And whisper they did. I felt the sound before I heard it, the way air changes when people shift their attention. My chest tightened. My body wanted to retreat, but I forced my heels to stay planted on the marble floor. He guided her like a prize onto the center of the floor, and I heard his voice, loud, performative, dripping with the certainty that everyone was listening. Allow me to introduce the woman who makes everything in my life run smoothly. Laughter rippled, followed by applause. My face burned. I lifted my champagne glass, though my lips had gone dry. Someone at my side leaned closer, whispering just loud enough for me to catch. That must sting. I didn't turn. I didn't let my expression break. Instead, I let the cold fizz touch my tongue and reminded myself to breathe. Dignity, Lauren. Hold it! Across the room, she tilted her chin higher, her hand resting on his chest like a claim staked in public. Their smiles looked rehearsed, almost brittle under the lights. But to the watching crowd, they were radiant. Memories pressed at me. His late nights, the excuses about work emergencies, the way he dismissed my questions as paranoia. Back then, I had chosen silence to keep the marriage intact. Now, silence was my shield, not my sacrifice. The MC's voice rose, announcing a toast in honor of new beginnings. My stomach twisted at the phrase. I wanted to laugh at the irony, but instead swallowed hard. As glasses clinked around me, I stepped slightly back into the shadow of a column, giving myself distance. The hum of voices grew louder, overlapping like waves. Then, as if he hadn't already made his point, my ex caught my eye from across the room. He smiled not warmly, but with the cruel satisfaction of someone who knows he has the upper hand. He pulled the assistant closer, kissed her cheek theatrically, and the crowd chuckled. The sound cut sharper than any insult. I turned my gaze to the chandeliers above. Their crystals scattered light like stars broken apart. It steadied me, that sight. Beauty above chaos. Order above cruelty. Inside, I whispered to myself, he can flaunt what he wants. But I'm still standing. A friend brushed past, murmuring that I looked calm. I almost smiled. Calmness had become my quiet rebellion. But even as the evening dragged on, I felt the weight of eyes on me, felt the stories being written about me in real time. The discarded wife, the outsider, the invisible. Yet there was another current in the room, an undercurrent I couldn't quite name. As though everyone was watching a play, waiting for the next act, unaware that the script had already been written by someone who wasn't even there. His father. I didn't know it then, but that night's cruelty was only the beginning. The estate, the will, the secrets sealed in documents, those were waiting in the wings. For now, I clutched the stem of my glass, lifted my chin, and walked out into the cool Santa Monica night. The ocean air stung my cheeks, and the crash of waves drowned out the echo of laughter behind me. I let the darkness wrap around me like a shield. My heels clicked against the pavement, each step measured, each step mine. What I didn't realize was how quickly their display of triumph would collapse, how soon his father's voice would rise from beyond the grave to rewrite everything they had tried to steal from me. And as I breathed in the salt air, I almost felt it coming like the hush before a storm. But that night, one message changed everything. The morning after the gala, I needed air. Not just the kind you pull into your lungs, but the kind that stretches wide and opens so big it can carry what you can't name. Santa Monica gave me that. The pier with its faded boards and carnival colors has always been a place where the sound of waves takes over the voices in my head. I wrapped my scarf tighter around my neck and stepped onto the boardwalk. The sky was pale, washed in early light. Vendors rolled carts into place. A busker strummed a guitar near the entrance, his voice low, as if he were still waking up. The smell of frying dough drifted from a food stand that had opened too early for tourists. I walked slowly, my heels tapping against the wooden planks. Each step echoed back at me. The rhythm reminded me of last night, the ballroom's marble, the sound of laughter, the hollow applause. But here the ocean answered as if to remind me that sound can be swallowed, reshaped, made small against something larger. I found a bench near the railing and sat letting the salt air sting my face. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone not to scroll, but just to hold something solid. Messages blinked across the screen. I saw him. Are you okay? You don't deserve that. I didn't answer. Words felt like strangers right now. Instead, I reached into my bag to find a tissue, but my fingers brushed against something else, a folded photograph. I froze. It wasn't supposed to be there. I pulled it out slowly. The edges were worn, the ink slightly faded. It was a picture of me and his father taken years ago at a family dinner. I remembered that night he had been unwell, and I had insisted on helping him up the stairs. Someone snapped the photo when we paused laughing halfway up. I hadn't seen it in years. I didn't even know how it ended up in my bag. My breath caught. The man in the photo had been more than a father-in-law. He was kind in the quiet ways people overlook, asking if I had eaten, offering books he thought I'd like, listening without rushing. He once told me, "You have a patience my son will never understand." At the time, I thought it was just an observation. Now it felt like a warning I had ignored. I traced the outline of the photo with my thumb. For a moment, the noise of last night receded. His arrogance, her smirk, the crowd's whispers, all of it dimmed in the presence of that memory. The ocean stretched before me, restless and endless. A gull dipped low, its cry sharp against the wind. I thought about patience, about silence, about how much strength it takes to hold both without shattering. Behind me, a couple laughed as they leaned against the railing, their voices carefree. I turned my face away, embarrassed at how envy rose in me like a tide. I closed my eyes. What if this is what my life is now, always watching, never belonging? But another thought followed quieter. What if this is only the middle, not the end? I folded the photo carefully and tucked it back into my bag. It didn't feel like an accident anymore that I had found it. It felt like a reminder, a thread pulling me forward. I stood and began to walk again, weaving through families and joggers. The smell of popcorn mixed with sea air. Music from the carousel floated through the air, soft and nostalgic. For a moment, I felt like I was walking through two worlds, the one where I was humiliated and the one where I was simply a woman on a pier, alive, breathing, moving forward. At the far end of the pier, I stopped and leaned over the railing. The water shimmered silver in the morning light. I thought about how last night he had tried to define me, discarded wife, pitiful observer. But here, with the ocean's pulse beneath me, I knew definitions can change. Tides shift, roles rewrite themselves. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a friend, it was an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. The message was short. "Lauren, I need to speak with you about the estate. Call me." I stared at the words, my heart pounding. The estate, his father, the man in the photograph. For a moment, the pier spun around me. I gripped the railing, the wood rough under my palms. The assistant's laughter from last night echoed in my head, sharp as broken glass. My ex's smug smile, their certainty that they had won. But the message in my hand whispered something else. Not yet. The story isn't finished. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and let the wind whip through my hair. Below me, waves crashed against the pillars, strong and relentless. For the first time since the divorce, I felt the faintest pull of something like possibility. Not revenge, not even justice, yet just the sense that the tide was shifting. I turned and began to walk back toward the city, the photo safe in my bag, the message burning in my pocket. I didn't know it then, but the estate would not just reopen wounds. It would rewrite the battlefield entirely. And the assistant who thought she had replaced me would soon learn what it meant to stand on borrowed ground. The ocean roared behind me, and I let it carry the echo of last night's humiliation away. Ahead of me, the streets of Santa Monica stretched wide, waiting. But that afternoon, when the lawyer called, everything I thought I understood began to unravel. The restaurant smelled of sea salt and citrus, the kind of place where every table is dressed in white linen and every glass seems to sparkle under the coastal sun. I hadn't planned to eat there. I only wanted coffee, a quiet corner, maybe a moment to steady myself after the lawyer's call. But fate has a way of choosing its own settings. I had just settled near the back, a view of the ocean framed by tall windows, when their laughter reached me. That sharp, performative kind of laughter you recognize even before you see the faces. My stomach tightened as I turned. There they were, my ex-husband leaning back with false ease, and beside him, the assistant draped in elegance she hadn't earned. She was louder today, her voice cutting through the hum of the restaurant like glass against stone. I could have left, I should have left, but something in me said stay. Not to challenge, not to suffer, but to watch. Silence can be its own kind of strength, and I needed to remind myself I had it. I turned my gaze toward the window, determined to sip my coffee as though they were strangers. Yet their conversation swirled around me, carried by the air. Some women just don't know when to let go. The assistant said, her words crisp, pointed. A pause, then her laugh, a tinkling sound that felt rehearsed. The waiter at my table glanced nervously at me, as if checking whether I had heard. I smiled faintly, letting him know I was fine. Or at least that I wanted to seem fine. My ex added she was always too serious. No fun, no spark. That's why I needed someone who could keep up with me. He raised his glass toward the assistant, his tone smug. The humiliation pressed against my ribs, hot and unyielding. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I let my mind drift back to the photograph in my bag. His father's gentle smile, his words about patience. You have a patience my son will never understand. Patience wasn't weakness. It was a fire that burned steady where theirs flickered like cheap matches. The assistant's laughter grew sharper. Did you see her at the gala, standing there like a ghost? I almost felt sorry for her. She leaned closer to him, her hand brushing his arm. Almost. Something inside me hardened, not in anger but in clarity. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about the way they needed me to be their shadow so they could feel like light. I folded my napkin slowly, placed it beside my untouched plate, and stood. For a moment, I considered walking past their table, letting them see me up close, letting them feel the quiet weight of my presence. But no, that would be too easy for them. They wanted reaction. They wanted proof I was still tethered to them. So instead, I walked out the side door into the sunlight. The air was cooler outside, scented with ocean spray. My heels clicked against the pavement, a rhythm steadier than the trembling in my hands. I inhaled deeply, letting the salt burn through the lingering shame. On the sidewalk, I paused, gripping the strap of my bag. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the lawyer. Lauren, we must meet soon. There are documents you need to see. Documents. The words steadied me like an anchor. Paper didn't lie the way people did. Contracts, wills, signatures, they carried a weight that laughter and gossip could never erase. I tucked my phone away and began walking. As I passed shop windows, I caught sight of my reflection, chin, high shoulders squared. I didn't look like a ghost. I looked like someone who had survived humiliation and was still moving forward. Inside, though, my chest still ached. Words leave marks even when you refuse to show them. I ducked into a small bookstore a few blocks away, the kind with narrow aisles and the smell of paper that comforts you. I let myself wander, running my fingers along spines, grounding myself in the quiet. When I finally chose a book and carried it to the counter, the clerk smiled. Rough day, she asked, maybe noticing the tension in my face. I considered lying, but instead said softly, a long one. She handed me the receipt and replied, books are good company when people aren't. Her words stayed with me as I stepped back onto the street. The ocean glittered in the distance, reflecting sunlight like scattered glass. I thought again of the assistant's voice, her mockery, the way she had tried to erase me in front of strangers. But then I thought of the lawyer's message, the documents waiting. A different story was already being written, one she couldn't see yet. As I walked toward home, I realized something important. I didn't need to confront them in restaurants or ballrooms. My battle would be fought in silence on paper, in the places where truth couldn't be mocked away. And for the first time since the divorce, I felt not just the ache of humiliation, but the stirrings of resolve. Because somewhere sealed in an envelope or locked in a drawer was the beginning of their undoing. And soon I would see it with my own eyes. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon, while the sky outside my apartment turned a muted shade of gray, heavy with marine layer. I had been folding laundry, the ordinary rhythm of shirts and towels grounding me, when the vibration against the counter startled me. I almost ignored it. Unknown numbers rarely bring good news. But something in me, maybe the echo of the lawyer's earlier messages, made me answer. "Lauren," the voice said, firm yet formal, "this is Robert Hale. I represent the estate of Charles Whitman, your former father-in-law. I regret to inform you that he passed away last night." The words slipped into me slowly like cold water seeping through fabric. Charles, gone. I set the folded towel down, my fingers trembling. For a moment I saw his face, the quiet smile, the way he leaned on his cane, yet never let it diminish him. I'm sorry to hear that," I managed. My throat felt thick, my chest hollow. "There are matters regarding his estate that concern you directly," Robert continued. "I'd like to arrange a meeting at my office this week." "Me?" My voice cracked. "I'm not his family anymore. I'm divorced." "Yes," he interrupted gently, "but your name remains relevant in his will. It is best we discuss this in person." I agreed to a time, wrote down the address with shaky handwriting, and ended the call. The silence in my apartment afterward felt heavier than before. I sat at the edge of my couch staring at the floor. Charles was gone. A man who had once been more of a father to me than my own, who had told me stories about his youth in the Midwest, who had pressed books into my hands with notes scribbled in the margins, gone. And yet, amid the grief, another feeling slithered in confusion. Why was my name still in his will? Divorce usually cuts those ties clean, unless he hadn't wanted them cut. I thought of the photograph I had found days earlier. His laugh caught mid-motion, the warmth in his eyes. Perhaps he had meant for me to remember to hold on to some piece of him. The knock at my door startled me. When I opened it, a neighbor stood holding a small package. "This was left at your door earlier," she said. Inside was a card, no return address, only my name written in Charles's familiar handwriting. My chest tightened as I opened it. "Lauren," it read. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't say goodbye in person. Know that my respect for you never changed. Don't let their cruelty diminish you. The truth will hold." I pressed the card against my chest, tears burning at the corners of my eyes. His voice, even in ink, still had the power to steady me. That night, as the city lights flickered through my window, I knew word of his death would spread quickly. And with it, speculation about the estate. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, headlines buzzed across social media. "Whitman estate worth millions. Succession unclear." Photographs of my ex filled the articles, his arm draped proudly around the assistant. They looked victorious already, as if money had fallen neatly into their hands. At a cafe near the pier, whispers floated from the next table. "He's going to inherit everything now. Lucky break for him and that girl." I sipped my coffee slowly, forcing calm, though my pulse raced. Lucky break. They had no idea how complicated estates could be. No idea how words written on paper could shift fortunes, dismantle illusions. By afternoon, my phone lit up with a message from an old acquaintance. "Lauren, did you see? He's celebrating at the marina tonight. Champagne on the yacht." Of course he was. My ex had always equated death with opportunity. It made my stomach turn. I walked to the window of my apartment, the ocean just visible in the distance, silver under the sun. The assistant would be by his side, clinking glasses, soaking in the envy of others. They would think the world was finally theirs. But a quiet certainty stirred in me, small but unshakable. Charles wouldn't have left everything in their hands so easily. He knew his son too well, trusted him too little. Still, I couldn't ignore the unease that twisted inside me. Because if they believed they had won, they would wield that belief like a weapon. And I knew from experience that public humiliation was their favorite game. That evening, I walked the streets of Santa Monica, the city alive with neon and laughter. I stopped at the pier, leaning against the railing as the waves rolled below. The air was cool, salted, steady. I thought of Charles again, his calm, his belief in patience. "Don't let their cruelty diminish you. The truth will hold." I whispered the words to myself like a promise. Behind me, music drifted from the arcade, mingling with the cries of gulls. Ahead of me stretched the endless dark of the ocean. Somewhere in that darkness, my ex was toasting his triumph. But I knew better than to confuse noise with permanence. I clutched the card tighter in my coat pocket, the ink pressing against my palm like a seal. Soon the lawyer's office would open its doors, and the truth Charles left behind would be spoken aloud. And when that day came, no amount of champagne or laughter would shield them from it. The morning light spilled across my kitchen counter, soft and indifferent, as though the world hadn't shifted the night before. My coffee sat untouched, steam curling upward before fading into the air. I kept rereading the card Charles had left me, my thumb brushing over the grooves of his handwriting. That's when the phone rang. "Lauren," the voice said, crisp yet gentle, "this is Robert Hale again. We need to meet sooner rather than later. There are documents that directly concern you." Documents. My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Yes. The will is complex, and your name appears in a way that makes your presence essential. Can you come this afternoon?" I hesitated, staring at the gray ceramic mug between my hands. "I don't want trouble." Robert paused. "It isn't trouble, Ms. Whitman. It's your right. Come in at 2. He gave me the address again, downtown Santa Monica, an office tower with a view of the water. I hung up and sat motionless for a long time, the card still open on the counter, the weight of possibility pressing against me. By noon, I had changed twice, once into a dress too formal, then into jeans too casual, before settling on a navy blouse and black trousers. Neutral, steady, not begging for attention. My reflection in the mirror met me with eyes that looked older than 30 but steady. The lobby of the building was all glass and steel, sunlight pouring through. I pressed the elevator button with damp fingers, my reflection warped in the polished surface. When the doors opened onto the 10th floor, Robert Hale was waiting. He was in his late 50s, silver hair, neatly combed, eyes sharp but not unkind. He shook my hand firmly and guided me into a conference room lined with bookshelves and framed certificates. On the table sat a leather-bound folder thick with paper. "Please," he said, motioning for me to sit. I lowered myself into the chair, my heart thudding. "Charles prepared this will carefully," Robert began. "He revised it 3 times in the past 5 years. Each revision took into account the complexities of his family." I almost smiled. Complexities was a kind word for what I had married into. Robert opened the folder, sliding a page toward me. "This is the final version dated 6 months ago. As you can see, your name is still included." I stared at the document. My name, Lauren Whitman, printed clearly in black ink right beneath clauses about trusts and charitable donations. I pressed my lips together, my pulse roaring in my ears. Why, I whispered. "Because Robert said, leaning back, he trusted you. More than his son. More than anyone else." The words hit me harder than I expected. Trusted me. The memory of Charles's steady eyes, the quiet talks in his library, the way he had once confided his disappointment in his son, they all returned at once. Robert continued, "You're not a beneficiary in the traditional sense. Instead, you are listed as a trustee. That role gives you oversight control even over certain assets until conditions are met." Conditions, yes. The estate specifies that your ex-husband will not receive his full share if he remarries within 1 year of his father's death. Furthermore, if there is evidence of misconduct with employees, Robert paused, his eyes flickering knowingly, the distribution may shift entirely. I felt the room tilt slightly. The assistant. Their public displays, their smug certainty. They had no idea what Charles had written into law. My hands shook as I traced the edge of the page. "So I'm supposed to enforce this?" Robert nodded. "Yes. It won't be easy. They will contest it, fight it, try to smear you. But the documents are solid." Charles was very thorough. I closed my eyes for a moment, the echo of the assistant's mocking voice from the restaurant still fresh. "Some women just don't know when to let go." Let go. That's what they thought I had done. That's what they wanted me to do. But Charles's signature on that page was proof that letting go wasn't weakness, it was patience, waiting for truth to surface. I opened my eyes. "What happens next?" Robert slid another sheet across the table. "We'll schedule a formal reading of the will. Your ex-husband and his partner will be present. Until then, I advise you to keep this confidential." Confidential. The word felt both protective and heavy. I imagined them celebrating at the marina, drinking champagne, oblivious to the storm sealed in this folder. I signed the acknowledgement page, my signature steady despite the tremor in my chest. As I left the office, the ocean spread out before me through the glass walls of the lobby. Sunlight bounced off the water, bright and merciless. I pressed the elevator button, my reflection staring back at me no longer invisible. On the street below, the city moved as if nothing had changed. but I knew better. Something had shifted quietly on paper. That night, I sat at my desk, the folder in front of me. I ran my fingers across the embossed leather cover, feeling its weight. Every clause, every condition inside was a quiet rebellion Charles had written against his own son's arrogance. I thought again of the assistant's smirk, of my ex's theatrical kiss in the ballroom. They believed they had already won. But the truth sat in front of me, waiting to be read aloud. And I would be there, calm and silent, when their certainty cracked. It began with whispers. At first, they reached me through friends, an offhand remark at a party, a sideways glance in a grocery store. Then the whispers grew louder, traveling faster than I could keep up. By the end of the week, they had a shape Lauren only stayed in the will because she seduced the old man. I heard it first from my colleague, a quiet woman named Elise, who cornered me in the hallway at work. Her eyes flickered with concern. "Lauren, I just wanted you to know what people are saying about you and Charles." The folder in my bag felt heavier. "I see." "I don't believe it," Elise added quickly. "I just thought you should hear it from me before someone less kind said it." "Less kind?" I nodded, thanked her, and kept walking, though the walls seemed to lean closer with every step. By lunchtime, the rumor had reached social media. A blurry photo of me at the gala, standing alone with my glass, was captioned, "Mistress in mourning." The assistant's friends had commented gleefully, their words, "Venom dressed as gossip." I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, my pulse hammering. My ex's hand was all over this, his flair for humiliation, his need to paint me as the villain. That evening when I walked home, two teenagers on the pier passed me and snickered. "That's her," one whispered. "The widow without the ring." Their laughter carried on the wind, sharp as glass. I tightened my scarf around my neck and kept moving. "Dignity, Lauren. Hold it." But holding it became harder with each passing day. Anonymous emails began to arrive, full of accusations: gold digger, homewrecker, fraud. I deleted them, but the words clung like stains. One night, as I sat at my desk with the folder open before me, the phone rang again. Robert's calm voice steadied me. "They've started early," he said. "Your ex knows the conditions of the will put him at risk. He's trying to discredit you before the reading." "I don't know if I can stand this," I whispered, my throat thick. "Yes, you can," Robert said firmly. "Remember, words are only air, paper is stone, and the paper is on your side." I closed my eyes, letting his words settle. Paper is stone. I traced the signature at the bottom of the will with my finger, grounding myself in its permanence. The next day, the smear campaign escalated. My ex gave an interview to a glossy magazine, standing proudly with the assistant by his side. My father was vulnerable, he said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. And unfortunately, some people took advantage of that vulnerability. It breaks my heart to see his legacy entangled with those who never truly loved him. The assistant nodded beside him, eyes wide with practiced sorrow. I watched the clip on my laptop, my hands trembling, rage clawing at the back of my throat. Those who never truly loved him. The irony was so thick it choked me. I wanted to shout the truth, to tell the world about the nights I sat by Charles's bedside, the hours spent listening to his regrets, the way he trusted me when his own son did not. But shouting wasn't my way, and Charles had left me more than memories. He had left me the truth pressed into paper, sealed with ink. That evening, I walked the pier again, the waves roaring beneath me. The ocean had become my confessional, the only place large enough to hold my anger. I leaned against the railing, the wind tangling my hair, and let the fury burn quietly in my chest. Two seagulls swooped low, squabbling over scraps, their cries sharp. Watching them, I thought of my ex and his assistant clawing at what they thought was theirs, blind to the trap waiting in the fine print of the will. As I turned to leave, a group of strangers passed, their laughter easy. One of them caught my eye and smiled kindly. It was such a simple gesture, yet it broke through the heaviness for a moment. Not everyone believed the lies. Not everyone cared about the noise. When I reached home, I found another envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed in bold letters, "Step aside or we'll bury you." I sat at the table, the note trembling in my hands. They were escalating. Desperation always made them crueler. Instead of tearing it up, I slid the note into the folder with the will. Evidence. Proof of their tactics. Later, I stood by the window looking out at the skyline. The city lights shimmered against the dark ocean, tiny but resilient. I whispered to myself, they can smear me, threaten me, laugh at me, but paper is stone, and the stone is already in my hands. I pressed Charles's card against my chest one more time, feeling the strength in his words. Don't let their cruelty diminish you. The truth will hold. And I realized that surviving this wasn't about winning arguments in public. It was about standing firm in silence, letting the storm spend itself while the foundation remained. They wanted me to break, but all I had to do was endure, because endurance was the sharpest weapon they would never see coming. Robert's office smelled faintly of leather and ink, the kind of scent that reminded me of libraries, where silence carried its own authority. I sat at the long mahogany table again, my hands folded in front of me, as the smear campaign echoed in the back of my mind. Words had been flying against me all week, sharper than knives. But here I hoped paper would speak louder. Robert adjusted his glasses and opened the leather folder with a deliberate calm that steadied me. I know this has been difficult, he began. But today, I want to show you something Charles left specifically for your protection. He slid a new set of documents toward me. My name appeared again, this time not only as trustee, but in clauses that detailed oversight, powers, restrictions, and fail-safes. The language was dense, but the meaning pulsed clear. Charles had built walls to keep his son out of power. I ran my eyes across the pages, my finger tracing the sentences slowly. He thought of everything. Robert nodded. Charles was meticulous. He knew his son's patterns, spending recklessly, surrounding himself with opportunists. He wanted someone steady in place. That's why he trusted you. I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat. Trusted me. The smear campaign outside these walls screamed lies. But here in black and white, Charles's trust was undeniable. Robert leaned forward, lowering his voice. There's more. He also recorded a statement on video. It's sealed, admissible in probate court if necessary. I haven't shown it to anyone yet. A chill prickled down my spine. A video. Yes. His voice, his image, his words beyond dispute. I'll play it at the formal reading if your ex contests the will. I gripped the edge of the table. The thought of Charles's voice filling a courtroom, silencing the accusations that painted me as a manipulator, made my chest ache with both fear and relief. Robert closed the folder gently. Keep calm, Lauren. The louder they get, the clearer it becomes why Charles took precautions. Noise cannot erase ink, and ink cannot erase his voice. When I left the office, the city buzzed with its usual rhythm, traffic footsteps, gulls circling above. Yet I felt as if I carried something secret in my bag, heavier than gold. I walked toward the pier, needing the ocean again. The waves roared beneath the wooden boards, steady and endless. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the articles that painted me as a fraud. Each one felt like a blow, but now behind each lie, I saw Charles's signature, the locked video, the shield he had built. At a bench overlooking the water, I opened my bag and pulled out the photograph again, the one of Charles laughing mid-step on the stairs. I held it up against the horizon, the ocean shimmering behind it. For a moment, I imagined his voice in the wind, Patience, Lauren. Hold steady. Footsteps approached. I turned to see Elise, my colleague, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. I thought I might find you here, she said softly. You've looked weighed down at work. She handed me a cup and sat beside me. I accepted it, grateful for the warmth. They're saying terrible things, she continued, eyes on the waves. But I know people who knew Charles. They all said he admired you. Her words loosened something tight in me. Thank you, I whispered. She nudged my shoulder lightly. Let them talk. Noise fades. Truth doesn't. We sat in silence for a while, the gulls crying above the carousel music faint in the distance. When Elise left, I stayed longer, the ocean wrapping around me. I thought of the assistant's laughter in the restaurant, the smugness of my ex in his interview, their certainty that they were untouchable. They had no idea that documents existed or that a video waited like a loaded gun behind courtroom doors. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of orange, I tucked the photo and the new documents safely into my bag. My ex could keep parading his assistant, spreading lies, buying headlines. None of it could alter the lines Charles had written, the voice he had recorded, the trust he had left behind. That night at home, I spread the documents across my desk. Legal jargon sprawled across the pages, but I read every line, every clause, every comma. The more I read, the stronger I felt. I whispered to myself, paper is stone, and stone is already in my hands. Outside, the city lights blinked against the dark ocean. My ex's laughter, the assistant's mockery, the gossip, they all seemed small now, drowned by the quiet power of ink and truth waiting to surface. I placed the photo at the top of the pile, Charles's smile watching over me. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe deeply, my chest rising without the weight of shame. Because now I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing. And when the time came, the documents would speak, and the video would echo, and silence, my silence, would finally become their undoing. The courthouse in Santa Monica was built from pale stone, its walls catching the morning light in a way that made the building look both imposing and fragile. I stood on the steps for a long moment before climbing them, my palms damp against the folder tucked under my arm. The documents inside felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. Inside, the air was cooler, laced with the faint scent of paper and polish. Wooden benches lined the walls, their surfaces worn from years of waiting bodies. I sat near the back, folding my hands together, forcing my shoulders not to curl inward. The room buzzed with quiet conversation until they entered. My ex, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his assistant clinging to his arm like she had been born to that role. She wore white, a deliberate choice, pure, innocent, untouchable. My stomach tightened, but I didn't look away. They saw me instantly. His smirk was small, quick, but it burned just the same. The assistant tilted her head, whispering something in his ear, her lips curling upward in mock sympathy. I focused on the wood grain of the bench in front of me, steadying my breath. The judge entered, the shuffle of robes filling the silence. We rose, then sat, the rhythm of formality grounding me. Robert sat beside me, his calm presence a shield. He slid a small note toward me. Remember, silence is strength. The proceedings began. The lawyer representing my ex launched into his argument, voice polished, confident. Your Honor, this will is the product of undue influence. My client's father was vulnerable, manipulated by individuals who sought personal gain. Though my name was never spoken, it hung in the air like smoke. All eyes flicked toward me. I kept my expression still, my chin slightly lifted. They presented photographs, me helping Charles up the stairs, me seated beside him at dinner, me leaving his house late in the evening. Each image twisted into accusation. The assistant's smile grew wider with every projection. But the photographs did not wound me as much as the laughter that rippled through their side of the room, soft and cruel. I gripped the folder tighter, pressing my thumb against the edge of the paper. When it was Robert's turn, he rose slowly, his voice calm and deliberate. Your Honor. Charles Whitman was not a man easily manipulated. He revised his will multiple times, each revision demonstrating clarity of thought and purpose. This final version was executed with witnesses present and legal counsel, myself included. Furthermore, my client, Mrs. Lauren Whitman, is not a beneficiary seeking wealth. She is a trustee entrusted only to safeguard the conditions Charles himself established. The room quieted. The word trustee lingered, shifting the air. Robert continued, we will provide documentation of Charles's correspondence demonstrating his intent and his faith in Mrs. Whitman's integrity. He tapped the folder before him, my folder, the one heavy with clauses, letters, and truth. The judge nodded, eyes scanning the pages as Robert handed them over. Across the room, my ex shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. The assistant leaned closer, whispering urgently, her composure cracking for the first time. As the session adjourned for recess, I remained seated, letting the others file out. The wood of the bench was cool beneath my fingertips. The weight of gazes slid off my back, but the echo of accusation lingered. I finally rose, stepping into the hallway bathed in slanted sunlight. My ex was waiting there, his assistant at his side. He blocked my path with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You should enjoy this while it lasts, he murmured, his voice low. Paper can burn, lies can spread faster than truth. I met his gaze, silent. The assistant leaned forward, her perfume sharp, her voice dripping with mock kindness. Poor Lauren. Always playing second fiddle. You think a piece of paper makes you strong? Her laugh was brittle, almost desperate. I saw it then, the cracks beneath their bravado. They were afraid. I stepped past them without a word, my silence louder than any retort. Outside, the sky was streaked with clouds, the air thick with the smell of ocean salt. I walked down the courthouse steps slowly, each movement deliberate, as if the ground itself was steadying me. That evening, I sat at my desk, the documents spread before me once more. The smear campaign, the photographs, the whispers, they were noise. Here was stone. I traced my name again, the ink solid, unshaken. In the distance, the city's lights shimmered against the ocean, tiny but resilient. I whispered to myself, this is only the beginning. The louder they shout, the closer we are to the moment Charles's voice will speak, because soon the video would surface. And no rumor, no laughter, no smear could stand against his voice, carried into the courtroom like a tide. The house smelled faintly of dust and cedar when I stepped inside. Robert had called me that morning, his voice calm as ever. Lauren, there are more materials. You should see items Charles left in his private study. They may help us if the court battle intensifies. So now I stood in the old Whitman residence, a place I hadn't visited since before the divorce. The curtains were drawn, muting the sunlight. Silence pressed against the walls, broken only by the ticking of an antique clock in the hallway. Robert led me to the study. Everything here has been inventoried, but certain personal effects are meant for you. He gestured toward a cedar box resting on the desk. I hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside were envelopes, yellowed at the edges, Charles's handwriting etched in blue ink across each one. My chest tightened. I picked up the first envelope and unfolded the letter. Lauren, it began, there will be days when silence feels like weakness. Don't believe it. Silence is where strength gathers, waiting for the right moment. You gave me peace when my own son gave me noise. For that, I will always be grateful. The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. I pressed my palm against the paper as though I could feel his voice through the ink. The next letter was shorter, written shakier. Thank you for the nights you sat with me when breathing was hard. You never asked for anything, only listened. That is love, not manipulation. Remember that when others try to twist the story. I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. Each sentence was a quiet anchor pulling me back from the storms of rumor and smear. Robert watched silently as I read, his hands folded behind his back. When I finally looked up, he said softly, "These letters are powerful. They're not just sentimental, they're evidence of his intent and his perception of you. If necessary, we can introduce them in court." I nodded, though. Part of me recoiled at the idea of displaying such private words in public. Still, I knew what they meant. Truth written long before any contest could twist it. As I gathered the letters back into the box, memories stirred. Afternoons in this very study, Charles reading aloud from old novels, his gravelly voice filling the room. I remembered him pausing mid-sentence to ask what I thought, listening, as though my opinion mattered more than the author's. That was who he was with me, a man who valued patience over spectacle. I carried the box to my apartment later that day, setting it gently on my desk beside the folder of legal documents. Side by side, they looked like two halves of the same shield law, and love paper and ink, both binding in their own way. That evening, unable to sleep, I opened another letter. Lauren, it read, "If ever you feel cornered, remember, truth is not fragile. It waits. It does not rush. Let the others exhaust themselves in noise. You need only stand, and the truth will arrive in its own time." I folded the paper slowly, my breathing steadying. His words were more than comfort. They were instruction, a map through the chaos. The next morning, the smear campaign surged again. Online forums buzzed with new accusations. She forged documents. She preyed on an old man's kindness. Screenshots of the assistant's posts flooded social media, her face always tilted in false sorrow. But this time, I didn't feel the same crushing weight. I reached for the letters instead. I read Charles's words until the noise outside dulled, until the ink reminded me of who I truly was. At work, Elise caught me in the break room. "You've changed," she said softly. "You don't look defeated anymore." I smiled faintly, because I remembered something important. Noise fades, paper holds. Her eyes softened. "I'm glad." That night, I spread the letters across my desk, arranging them like a mosaic of memory. The photograph of Charles laughing sat at the center, his presence tangible even in absence. I whispered aloud, as though he were listening, "I'll stand Charles. I'll hold steady." Outside my window, the Santa Monica skyline glowed against the dark, a scattering of lights defying the night. I let the sight settle into me, because soon those letters, his voice pressed into paper, would meet the lies head-on. And when that day came, it would no longer be just my silence against their noise. It would be his words written long before they ever thought to smear me, carrying the weight of truth into the room where everything would change. I didn't need to see them to know the pressure was breaking through. I could feel it in the sudden shift of tone, the frantic edge seeping into their once polished appearances. The first sign came through a mutual acquaintance, a woman who had attended one of their lavish dinners. She called me afterward, her voice low. They were arguing in front of everyone, she whispered. She, the assistant, was furious, said he wasn't doing enough to protect their future. People noticed. It was ugly. I thanked her, hung up, and sat still for a long time, letting the image play in my mind. The assistant's laughter had once been cruel, sharp, confident. Now it was cracking, giving way to desperation. A few days later, it spilled onto the public stage. My ex's attorney filed a motion claiming new evidence alleged messages from me to Charles, supposedly begging for money, promising loyalty in return. The implication was clear: they were painting me as a manipulative gold digger, willing to barter affection for inheritance. Robert placed the printed screenshots in front of me during our meeting. They claimed these came from your email. I stared at the pages. The words didn't sound like me. Too blunt, too transactional. They're fabricated. Robert nodded. Easily proven. The syntax, the dates, the headers, they don't match. But it shows their strategy. They're desperate enough to forge. My chest tightened. Won't the court still look at me differently, even if it's disproven? Perhaps, Robert admitted. But desperation is a dangerous weapon. If we're patient, they'll expose themselves further. Lies have a way of collapsing under their own weight. That night alone in my apartment, I reread the forged messages again, fury simmering beneath my skin. They wanted me humiliated, stripped of dignity, erased from the narrative. They thought if they shouted loudly enough, no one would notice the cracks. But I knew better. I returned to the letters Charles had left me, spreading them across the desk. His words steadied me. Truth is not fragile. It waits. The following week, I heard more stories. The assistant pressuring my ex in public, hissing sharp words when she thought no one was watching. If you don't fix this, she spat at him, according to one witness, everything your father left will vanish, and it'll be your fault. It was almost poetic. The same woman who once mocked me for being invisible was unraveling under the weight of her own visibility. The more she clawed, the more people noticed. Still, the smear campaign continued. Anonymous accounts posted doctored photos of me, altered text messages, half-truths stretched into lies. Some nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if silence still counted as strength or if it was becoming surrender. But then I remembered the sealed video, the letters, the documents signed and witnessed. Paper was stone, their noise was sand. One evening, while walking along the pier, I overheard two strangers talking. She doesn't look like someone who'd scam an old man, one said, glancing in my direction. The other two, they look greedy. The words soothed me more than I expected. People were beginning to see through the performance. A week later, Robert called me urgently. We have confirmation. The so-called evidence they submitted is falsified. We traced the digital fingerprints. It leads back to the assistant's laptop. I exhaled sharply, a laugh escaping me despite the weight in my chest. So, she's unraveling her own case. Exactly, Robert replied. But we'll wait. We don't want to reveal everything at once. Let them dig deeper. The image of her frantic at a keyboard crafting lies in the hope of holding on to power burned in my mind. The once smirking assistant was now clawing at shadows. That night, I stood by my window, the skyline of Santa Monica stretching across the horizon. Lights glowed against the dark, steady, unshaken. I whispered to myself, noise collapses, stone holds. But even as I tried to sleep, unease lingered. Because desperation rarely stops at forgery. And I feared what line they might cross next. In the silence of my room, I pressed Charles's card against my chest once more. His words, his trust, his faith. They were the anchor keeping me upright. And I knew the storm was nearing its peak. The courtroom felt colder that morning, though sunlight streamed through tall windows and dust floated lazily in the air. I sat at the same wooden bench, hands folded tightly in my lap, the familiar weight of the folder beside me. The smear campaign still raged outside these walls. But today, Robert had promised something different, something undeniable. When my ex walked in, his confidence was thinner than before, though he tried to drape it across his shoulders like his perfectly cut suit. The assistant followed her expression, brittle lips pressed into a line so tight it seemed ready to snap. The judge called the session to order. Formalities passed like ritual words, rising and falling in cadence, until Robert rose. He adjusted his glasses, his calm voice carrying across the room. Your Honor, the estate includes not only written instructions, but a recorded video prepared by Charles Whitman himself. It is relevant to these proceedings as it directly addresses concerns raised by the opposing counsel. A ripple of whispers moved through the courtroom. My ex's lawyer stood, objected half-heartedly, then sat down. When the judge shook his head, Robert gestured to the clerk, who dimmed the lights and wheeled a small monitor into place. My heart pounded. I had not yet seen the video myself. The screen flickered, then steadied. Charles appeared older, frailer than I remembered, but his eyes sharp, his voice steady. The room fell utterly silent. My name is Charles Whitman. He began, his tone firm. If this recording is being played, it means I am no longer here to speak for myself. So I will speak to you now with clarity so there can be no misunderstanding. The assistant shifted uncomfortably, her hand tightening on my ex's arm. He sat rigid, his jaw clenched, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. Charles continued, My son has many qualities, but restraint and judgment are not among them. He has chosen companions who encourage recklessness rather than integrity. I cannot in good conscience leave the entirety of my estate to hands I do not trust. Gasps rippled across the benches. He drew a breath slower now, but his voice never wavered. Lauren Whitman is different. She is patient. She has shown me kindness without asking for anything in return. To her, I entrust oversight. She will act as trustee to ensure that what I built is not squandered. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I held them back. His words pressed into me like a hand on my shoulder, steady and certain. Then came the blow that silenced even the whispers. If my son chooses to marry his assistant or any employee within 1 year of my death, he forfeits his claim. The estate shall instead be directed toward charitable foundations and safeguarded by trustees. This is my will, my choice, my voice. No rumor, no fabrication will change it. The screen froze for a moment, on his face lined, weary but unwavering before going dark. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the sound of the judge clearing his throat. The record will reflect this testimony. My ex erupted. This is manipulation, he shouted, leaping to his feet. She made him say that she poisoned him against me. The judge's gavel struck sharply. Order. The assistant tugged at his sleeve, her composure fracturing, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for escape. Robert rose calmly. Your Honor. The video was authenticated by independent experts months before Mr. Whitman's passing. This was his decision, his words, his conditions. The judge nodded, scribbling notes. The evidence is admissible. We will proceed accordingly. I sat motionless, my pulse hammering in my ears. Around me, the atmosphere had shifted. The whispers no longer questioned me, they questioned him. For the first time since this battle began, I felt the weight lift, replaced by something lighter, steadier. Validation. Not from me defending myself, but from Charles's voice echoing through the room with unshakable authority. As the court recessed, I remained seated, gathering myself. My ex stormed past, his face twisted with rage, the assistant trailing behind him like a shadow unraveling in daylight. You think this changes anything? He hissed at me as he passed. You're nothing without me. I didn't answer. My silence felt like armor, now stronger than any retort. Outside, I stepped into the sunlight, blinking as the warmth hit my skin. The sky above Santa Monica stretched wide and clear, the ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt. For the first time in months, I let myself inhale deeply, filling my lungs with air that didn't feel heavy. Charles's words still echoed inside me. This is my will, my choice, my voice. I whispered back softly but firmly, and I will honor it. Because now the battle wasn't about proving my worth. It was about protecting his truth. And truth had just spoken louder than all their lies combined. The next hearing arrived only days after the video had been played, but the air inside the courtroom felt completely different. The weight had shifted, the silence thicker, the tension sharper. People were no longer leaning forward to catch gossip about me. They were watching my ex, waiting to see if he would detonate. He didn't disappoint. From the moment the session opened, his leg bounced under the table, his jaw clenched tight. The assistant sat rigid beside him, her hands folded too neatly, her eyes darting toward him in quick, nervous glances. The judge began to address procedural matters, but my ex cut him off. His voice raised. This entire proceeding is a sham. He slammed his palm against the table, the crack echoing through the room. My father was manipulated. Everyone knows it. He jabbed his finger toward me, twisted him into this. Gasps rippled through the benches. The judge's gavel came down sharply. Mr. Whitman, you will restrain yourself. But he didn't. His voice grew louder, his words more frantic. Do you think my father trusted her? He barely knew her. She was nothing. Nothing. And now you're all treating her like she's the guardian of his empire. I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my face calm. Inside my chest trembled with the force of his rage, but I did not let it touch my surface. Silence. Charles had taught me was not weakness. It was fire contained. The assistant tugged at his sleeve. Stop, she hissed her whisper, just audible in the hush. You're making it worse. He jerked away from her, his face contorted. Worse. You wanted this. You pushed me to fight. You wanted the money, the status. This is on you. Her cheeks flushed crimson. She leaned back, her arms crossing over her chest, her eyes suddenly cold. For the first time, she looked less like his accomplice and more like his accuser. The courtroom hummed with murmurs, the shift palpable. His outburst had cracked their alliance wide open, and everyone could see it. Robert rose calmly. Your Honor, I believe today has shown exactly why Charles Whitman took the precautions he did. His son's volatility, his inability to exercise judgment, these are not the traits of a responsible heir. The judge nodded gravely, tapping his pen. Noted. My ex sank back into his chair, but the damage was done. His face glistened with sweat, his tie askew, his breathing heavy. He looked less like a man fighting for his inheritance and more like one unraveling before the eyes of the court. During recess, I remained seated again, the hum of voices swirling around me. He stalked past. But this time his words weren't venom, they were mutters scattered incoherent. The assistant trailed behind him, but not at his side. There was space now, a gulf between them wide enough for the whole room to see. As I stepped into the hallway, Elise appeared. I hadn't known she was there until she touched my arm. He's finished, she whispered. Everyone saw it. You didn't have to say a word. I nodded faintly, my throat thick. Silence speaks louder than shouting. She squeezed my hand, her eyes warm. Exactly. Outside the sky was a flawless blue, the air sharp with the scent of ocean. I stood at the courthouse steps, my hands gripping the railing, watching as reporters swarmed my ex. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward. He shouted into them, his voice ragged, his words tangled. The assistant hovered behind him, her eyes darting away from the lights, her smile gone. I didn't linger. I walked down the steps slowly, each movement deliberate, each breath steady. The noise behind me faded with distance, replaced by the steady rhythm of the ocean breeze. That evening, I returned to my apartment and spread the letters across my desk once more. Charles's handwriting steadied me, his words anchoring me against the chaos of the day. Truth is not fragile. It waits. I thought of my ex's collapse, the assistant's retreat, the silence I had held like a weapon. Truth had waited, and now it was surfacing. The city skyline shimmered outside my window, glowing against the dark ocean. I whispered to myself, it's almost over, because soon the court would render its decision. And in that decision, their empire of noise would crumble for good. The judgment came on a gray morning, the kind where the horizon seemed to blur between sea and sky. I sat in the same wooden bench I had occupied for weeks, my hands folded in my lap, the familiar folder of documents resting beside me. The courtroom was quieter than usual, the murmurs subdued as though everyone sensed the finality of the day. My ex sat rigid across the aisle, the assistant beside him, her eyes downcast. The space between them was no longer just physical, it was an entire chasm carved by betrayal, fear, and unraveling ambition. The judge entered his robes swaying softly, his expression unreadable. Paper shuffled, a cough echoed, and then the room hushed entirely. This court. The judge began having considered the evidence. The testimony and the will of Charles Whitman finds the estate valid as written. The conditions set forth shall stand. Mrs. Lauren Whitman is affirmed as trustee. The son's inheritance remains conditional subject to the stipulations clearly expressed by the deceased. Gasps rippled across the room. My ex's face flushed crimson. He leapt to his feet, his voice hoarse. You can't do this. It's my birthright. The gavel struck sharply. Sit down, Mr. Whitman. The assistant shifted uneasily, her lips parting as though to defend him, but then she stopped. She sat back, folding her arms, her gaze fixed on the table. She was finished aligning herself with a sinking ship. I remained still, my face calm, though inside my chest trembled with a storm of emotions. Relief, grief, gratitude. I closed my eyes briefly, letting Charles's words echo in me. Truth is not fragile. It waits. When the session adjourned, I walked past reporters crowding the steps outside. Microphones thrust toward me. Voices demanded statements. Do you feel vindicated? What do you say to the accusations? I said nothing. Silence was my answer, the same silence that had carried me through humiliation, rumors, and courtroom shadows. The ocean breeze met me as I reached the street. Salt air filled my lungs, sharp and cleansing. I didn't look back at the courthouse. Some doors once closed should stay that way. That evening, I returned to the pier, the place where weeks ago I had first felt the stirrings of possibility after humiliation. The boards creaked under my steps, gulls cried above, and the horizon stretched endless before me. I carried the cedar box with me tucked under my arm. At the far end of the pier, I sat on a bench and opened it one last time. The letters, Charles's handwriting steady even in illness, lay in neat stacks. I read a single line again, you need only stand and the truth will arrive in its own time. Tears slid down my cheeks, soft and unforced. Not from pain this time, but from release. I folded the letters carefully, placed them back inside, and closed the lid. They had guided me through the storm, now they could rest as he did. The sky above Santa Monica burned orange with the setting sun. The ocean shimmered like glass waves rolling steady and patient. I rose from the bench, walked to the railing, and let the wind carry my hair across my face. Behind me, I knew my ex was unraveling, left with nothing but his rage. The assistant, once smug, was already fading from his side. Their noise had collapsed into silence of their own making. Ahead of me stretched something quieter, freer. Not wealth, not victory shouted from rooftops, but peace. A rebirth. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with salt air, and whispered into the horizon, Thank you, Charles. I'll carry your trust forward. Then I turned, walking back toward the city lights that shimmered like scattered stars against the darkening sky. The skyline rose ahead of me, bright, steady, full of promise. For the first time, I saw it not as a backdrop to humiliation, but as a horizon wide enough for a new beginning. And as I walked, my silence no longer felt like defense. It felt like freedom, because I hadn't needed to destroy them. I had only needed to endure, and endurance had become my quiet private victory.